Welcome, everybody, to the Sports Hub Underground. This is Matt Dolloff, and I'm here with Ty Anderson, as we are every single episode. You can, of course, get us wherever you get your podcasts, and you can get every episode at 985thesportshub.com and the Sports Hub app. We come to you on a Saturday because the Bruins and the NHL decided to have the trade deadline on a Friday, and then the Bruins had a lot of work to do, had a lot of paperwork to do, apparently, so they went really late. Don Sweeney, talked late. And so everything went late, but there's a lot to get to, Ty. But we're just going to zip through these trades. But first, I want to
hear. Yeah, we're going to have a longer episode on like Monday or Tuesday, getting into the nitty gritty of it all. So don't worry. This is just, we want to get you all caught up. We want to get our initial thoughts out there before they melt out of our brain and we see like the billion players that are debuting for the Bruins against the Lightning on Saturday afternoon.
Yes, initial thoughts. Yes, we're gonna flesh this out a little more next week or next time we're in the studio together. So, Ty, is this the craziest day you've ever had covering the Bruins? I mean, they traded Brad Marchand. This is the first time ever that you're covering the team in your 15 years or whatever it is without Marchand on the team, and so there's that. And it basically became a fire sale with Marchand, Brandon Carlo, Charlie Coyle. And then you had Trent Frederick and Justin Brazeau earlier in the week. Just what's your big picture thought on the trades and just where the Bruins go from here?
The best era of post 05 lockout Bruins hockey is officially dead. And you walk away from it saying, should have won more. Should have had at least one more cup victory in there, whether that's 2019, whether that's 2023 when they had a $92 million team in an $81 million cap world. You should have had at least one more. You didn't. That part of it sucks, but this is an acknowledgement that the old era is done and the new era is upon us. Now, what is the new era? That is still undefined, but this was finally, perhaps 2 years later than we all thought, an acknowledgement that the past is officially the past now for the Boston Bruins.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I look back on this era and I think, call it the Patrice Bergeron era, I feel they should have won 3 cups. I mean, they got close a couple times. Win one of those years you're supposed to win, 2019, even like 2014, one of those years where they underachieved, where they bowed out earlier than you were expecting. I feel like they should have had 2 or 3 cups in this era, and it was not for lack of trying. They had a great core, and Marchand was obviously the last piece of that. And so, end of an era, start of a new one. And I think some people might look at this new era of the Bruins as they don't want to get on board with some of their cornerstone pieces that they're going to be building around going forward. But we're officially in the Pastrnak, McAvoy, Swayman era. Like, we've been talking about those guys as their sort of big 3 pieces down the middle of the ice. Or I should say at all 3 levels of the ice. So like that's what we got. I think that's what they got to do. They got to figure out how to build around those guys. I think anyone that thinks they're going to make this quote unquote hockey trade and move one of those guys is mistaken. I think they're going to build around those guys. And honestly, I think some of these trades sort of signify that they're making an attempt at that. But it's a lot of dartboard throws. So nothing set in stone with the guys they brought in, but I think this is sort of the first step toward building around those cornerstone pieces that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I can tell you those 3 players were basically the only players that the Bruins entered the deadline saying you can't have these guys. Anybody else will listen on, but you can't have Pastrnak, Swayman, or McAvoy. So clearly they agree that those are their foundational pieces. I also do believe that, this is a good building block in the sense that you have a goalie, a defenseman, and a forward. And so that part of it is interesting that, you're not chasing the elusive, franchise cornerstone defenseman or the goaltender. Like, you think you have those guys, right? And now it's about supporting them, having proper, proper complementary pieces around them. You still need a center, like long-term. That's still a long-term need for your franchise. But, to have a building block of a top 10 offensive weapon in hockey, a very strong 3-zone defenseman, and a goaltender who throw this year out the window, give him next year. Like, he was really good in the 2024 playoffs. And so I think you owe Swayman more than 1 year to show that he can be a number one goaltender. I think if you can't give him more than 1 year, then you shouldn't assign him to an 8-year contract in the first place. Like, that kind of, that kind of speaks for itself. But I do think now this is where the hard work begins now. And I think the biggest thing, Matt, and we'll go through the trades one by one. My other takeaway that I have from what they did is it's a course correction as best as one can make in terms of the over investment in size and physicality. Like, you look at everyone they brought in, they can all skate. They're on the smaller side, but they got speed and skill. And it's almost like the Bruins said, oh shit, this idea of us being big bad Bruins, like, it's not going to work in 2025. Like, we still need to score goals, right? And so I think that's something that I look at with the moves they made both at the NHL level and on the prospect front. It's almost like they're changing course, being like, we need more skill, man.
Yeah, I hope you're right. Yeah, I hope you're right that this was them saying, like, this is them sort of correcting the mistakes they made in the offseason, how they built the team, and saying, okay, yeah, you're right. We got to bring in more speed, more skill. But before we go through the trades one by one, there's one thing that sort of ties all these trades together, and you mentioned it. They're still looking for centers. They're still looking for long-term answers at center. And I thought it was interesting. You said this on Felger and Maz yesterday when they called you in impromptu to tell them, like, tell me about these players, because I've never heard of these guys. Classic. Casey Middlestat is the guy that they brought in that has the most experience, and he still has that first round pedigree. I've liked him in the past. He's been streaky. He's had flashes. He's still, never really put it all together, and now he's on his third team. And so you wonder what he really is at this stage. But I thought it was interesting that you said that he is probably a winger long term. And so I looked at that trade when they brought him in, and I thought, maybe they're looking for an answer at center there. But I guess maybe not with Middlestat. But the other guys they got in the trade, like Marat Huznadinov, who they got in the Brazeau trade, he feels like a middle six center type long term, two-way guy. Fraser Minton, who they got from the Leafs, sounds like maybe the guy that the Bruins fans will latch onto and take a liking to pretty quickly. Will Zellers, I'm not totally sure. He's only 18. He's in the USHL. He feels like a wing because he's not that big. I don't know if he's a center. But yeah, do you look at any of these pieces and see maybe not a number one center, but you see maybe a middle six sort of forming with those guys long term, at least the potential for it?
Yeah, I think so. There's I've referenced him before on this podcast. There's a guy, CCC Middleton is his Twitter name. He does tremendous work tracking lineups and where players play. He actually tweeted yesterday or this morning that Middlestat has played 63 games this year, and he's played all 63 at center. So, I look at him, though, and I see a guy who can't really win faceoffs. Like, he's a sub 45 in his career. He's won 42% of them this year. That's got to improve if he's going to be a center in this system, because they do stress that, winning your faceoffs and whatnot.
And he's like a playmaking type. And, like, I always just assume those guys are centers, the playmaking types.
Well, he's got great, he's got great vision, in my opinion, as a playmaker. So you want those guys typically in the middle. He's also got some good speed, which allows him to make plays through the middle of the ice. So you look at the physical tools and the vision and the brain, and you're like, okay, center. But you look at the face-off results, and you're like, not a center. And so can they work on that? Can they improve that? That's something they were able to do with Pavel Zacha. I think this is basically like, he's going to be deployed like Zacha and like Coyle, where, hey, you're going to play center, but if it's not going, we might move you to the wing. But what makes it interesting, though, is that you also have Matthew Poitras, who I think long-term you want to project as a center. I think maybe, Matt, this might sound a little crazy here, but, like,
oh boy,
do you transition Elias Lindholm to play right wing? He's going to take faceoffs, but he's going to play right wing during the actual sort of game, so to speak. Yeah. Because this is how Vancouver utilized him a year ago. They got a lot out of him towards the end. But But, Lindholm, like, it sounds crazy because you look at Lindholm and you go, okay, well, he's won 26 of his last 32 faceoffs entering Saturday's game. And that's a great faceoff option. Yeah. But if you have all these guys that are younger that you project as centers, like, it kind of makes the most sense to get them comfortable and growing in their natural position. So, right now, it's just kind of it's a real logjam of guys that I think long-term vision. You mentioned the guy they got from Minnesota. He's still 22 years old. Like, long-term, you want to view a lot of these guys at center, but can you make that happen? Is that possible for your team? You can always move Pavel Zacha back to the wing. It's funny, right? Like, I think that we've talked about Pavel Zacha and the Bruins and Morgan Geekie. And we've had this conversation of like, well, what if Geekie's a long-term left wing for David Pastrnak? Like, you got to pay that guy. Well, what if Pavel Zacha is the long-term left wing for David Pastrnak? And one of these guys is going to be the one playing in the middle. Like, what if they go back to that? And so they have a lot of options, but this is a discovery period now. The Bruins are not going to get 20 consequence-free games like they are right now. Like, this is the time to find out with a lot of these players. You don't have to win the games right now. You're expected to lose them. So you can move these guys all around and kind of figure out where they're going. And if you don't, then shame on you. You're wasting 19 games of again, risk-free, consequence-free. The fans are going to be happy if you lose because it means a higher draft pick potentially. Yeah. Like, you got to use that to say, okay, well, this guy might not be a center, but hey, we're going to find out right now.
Right. No, you know me, I'm anti-tanking. Like, I'm not saying the Bruins are tanking by any means, but that's just sort of how it goes when you trade off, 5 or 6 key pieces of your roster. Now just experiment and compete, and maybe try to get as high up in the draft as you can. Obviously, I think they're still waiting for that franchise center answer after all these trades, but probably going to be with the top 10 pick in the draft coming up this year. That's probably where they're going to identify a piece for the future there. So let's go to the individual trades now. We're going to start with the Brad Marchand trade. I know a lot of people were disappointed by the return there. It's a conditional second in 2027. Becomes a first round if he plays 50% of Panthers playoff games. Don Sweeney said 40 than 25 when he was asked by the great Mark Capello. Asked him about, that trade, how that worked. Thank you, Mark, for getting that out of him. So Brad Marchand needs to come
even if it was incorrect.
I know, that's crazy how you got Sweeney all flustered like that for a second. But yeah, like the Marchand has to come back healthy. He has to play half of the Panthers games, and then the Bruins will get another first-round pick. And, like, if that becomes a first-round pick in 2028, I mean, the Panthers do have, like, most of their core guys signed through 27-28 season. They have Barkov and Verhaeghe, Reinhart, and a few other guys that their names escape me, signed through 2028. So, the Panthers, you could look at them, they could still be a pretty good team as long as they have those core pieces. Sort of like
Forsling. You're missing my boner, Forsling.
That's the guy I always forget. Like, oh yeah, he's good, isn't he?
Yeah, he's very good. Very good.
There's been like 20 times the last couple seasons where I see him in like the top 10 rankings of the defenseman, like the 7th ranked defenseman in the league. I was like, Forsling, come on. But yeah, continually proves me wrong. Ended the Bruins season last year. But yeah, like the Panthers have those core guys signed through the next 3 years, so they could still be a decent team. Like, I don't think the Bruins are going to get a lottery pick by any means out of the Brad Marchand trade. I think the injury sort of screwed them. Like, I think if Brad Marchand was healthy, he probably could have fetched just a first-round pick, but they had to put these conditions on it. And the Bruins probably could have got a little more out of it if you were healthy and could start right away for the Panthers, and there was no question about him playing in the playoffs. So, yeah, I think the injury screwed them, but now Bruins fans have to root for the Panthers, basically.
Yeah, that part of it is interesting. Working through that trade, I wish there was like one fewer condition on that trade. And if I could pick which one I'd get rid of, it's the damn getting to the third round. Because in my opinion, the Atlantic bracket has 3 of the top 4 teams in the conference in that bracket. Like, it's not like it's Washington and you got to go through now a Natchez and Rantanen-less Hurricanes team or a Jack Hughes-less Devils team. Like, no, like you got the Tampa Bay Lightning, who we're going to see today, and I think have been absolutely phenomenal for the last 2 months. I want to say we're just watching their games, like they're humming along here. And you get Toronto, and Toronto's been a very good team this year. Now they get Brandon Carlo. We'll talk about that later, but that's a hard bracket to get through if you're the Florida Panthers. And so I know they're the defending Cup champions, but geez, that's not exactly a cakewalk, you know? And so that's got to happen. And he's got to be healthy and playing 50% of the games. Those are two, I don't love the odds of that personally. Now, conversely, if he doesn't play, if he's too hurt to get in action and he's a shell of himself, okay, then it's a free second-round pick. So beggars can't be choosers in that regard, but I wish there was just one fewer condition on that draft pick if I can get it right. And listen, it sucks, but it's a Sophie's choice. If you're a Bruins fan, would you rather keep the guy who might not play again this regular season and then he leaves on July 1, or would you rather get something for him, even if it's not the ideal price, and even if it's going to one of your top rivals? I'm probably leaning the latter because of where this team is right now and their lack of prospects and their lack of assets.
Yeah, I mean, considering all the assets that they just amassed in the last 24 hours, it's kind of crazy how you still look at them. It's where are the assets? Kind of a lot of these guys they're going to have to plug them into the NHL lineup and hope they get the most out of them. They're not really they're not assets.
And it's easy. It's so easy to Saturday morning quarterback this, right? You can look at Marchand playing last week against Pittsburgh and go, well, why was he playing? Okay, well, let's
You're muted.
Hold on. How are we sounding? Can you hear me again?
You were just muted.
All right, but you can hear me again. Okay, yeah. That's all we care about. But no, so you have to consider. Okay, where'd you lose me? Sorry.
Oh, you were talking about Brad Marchand playing against Pittsburgh, and then after that.
All right, yeah. So let's go back to that real quick. So let's say people are going to say, okay, well, why was he playing in that game? Why wasn't he healthy scratched? Okay, well, let's consider that the Bruins at that point were still trying to re-sign him to an extension, and the Bruins had felt like they had bridged the gap. They felt like they had bridged the gap in terms of the years they were offering. The money wasn't met yet, but the years were. And so if you scratch that guy in that game, you're sending the message of, oh yeah, we're actually going to go back on all the progress we've made. And so there's that part of it as well. It sucks. I wish he were healthy. If he were healthy when he was traded, he would have got the Brock Nelson return. He would have. He would have gotten something close to that. But he wasn't, and it limited the trade options. And think about this too, Matt. It limited the trade options from a return standpoint, but also a suitor standpoint. LA was in on him. LA wanted him. But LA is going to face the Edmonton Oilers in the first round of the playoffs this year, most likely. Is a hurt Brad Marchand bridging that gap between the Kings and the Oilers? No, it's just not. The Oilers have two of the best four players in the world, arguably two of the top three players in the world, for that matter. A hurt Marchand is not a worthwhile investment at the price point the Bruins wanted, right? You're not getting Quinton Byfield or Brant Clark or a first-round pick from the Kings if Marchand is not 100%. And so I think that also played a factor as well. Who's the one team that could afford to make that gamble?
All right, we're back, folks. Sorry about that. We had some technical difficulties. You probably just saw some fancy editing and post there.
Yeah.
Okay, we were having some connection issues. Sorry about that. But, okay, so we were talking about the Brad Marchand trade and how you said, the injury sort of screwed them, but, they sort of lost, potential suitors on the other end of it. And there were only a couple teams that would even, it would even be worth it for them to make that trade. And so I think that's sort of why they ended up trading him to Florida, which I definitely don't think Don Sweeney wanted to do that. But here we are. Moving on. We'll stick on the Marchand thing. I think it was you that asked Sweeney about, the contract talks with Marchand. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Sweeney talked a little bit about the Marchand contract thing, and he said there was a gap. So I assume that Marchand wanted a year or two more than what the Bruins are offering. So there's still the question of, you know what?
George is in the podcast now.
Hey, what's up, George? Producer extraordinaire.
So I'll see you, man.
All right.
Yeah.
Always good to see George. But yeah, like
this is becoming one of those like Barstool Pizza reviews where like 8 people come into the frame and like ask Portnoy for like a slice or like a sip or to buy him something. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
It's that viral video where they see like the little go-kart. There's like a car crash over here. There's people fighting over there, and this little go-kart comes out of the door. It's like, what is this now?
Yeah.
That's
well, real quick. Sorry if you lost me when I said this, but like, who's the one team that could make that kind of gamble? It's the defending Stanley Cup champions. Like they have the least skin in the game when it comes to, oh man, we can't upset Sweeney always uses the term upset the apple cart, right? Like not picks or whatever. Banners are forever. Like that is how teams that have won Stanley Cups operate. And the one team that could afford Marchand from both a money standpoint and an asset standpoint and knowing his value, when he is healthy, it's the defending cup champions. They have, again, the least skin in the game when it comes to that being a damaging impact if it doesn't work out. Because it's like, okay, yeah, that didn't work out, but look at the banner. It's still there. We still have last year's banner. It's not like the Penguins where it's like, geez, we haven't won in 8 years, and now the future is even worse. Right.
Yeah. No. The future is still now for the Panthers, and really, like I could still say that they're sort of the Cup favorite right now. Even like say they have a healthy Marchand in the lineup, like that, he's going to be a huge addition. Like Marchand, as we've seen, like he's not quite the same player that he used to be, but he's still a really good player, and so he's going to be huge for them, especially if he plays with Bennett and Tkachuk. That might be the biggest bunch of assholes that has ever been iced in an NHL ring.
Yeah, Austin Matthews is going to be like Korg in Avengers. When he's like, "Oh, the kid's back on the TV, call me a dickhead again." But it's going to be a whole line of dickheads yelling at the Maple Leafs in that playoff series. So
foundations are gone.
So like, oh, Mitch is dead. Marchand killed him. No, I do think though that you look at it's weird, right? Like I did ask Sweeney I asked Sweeney if Marchand forced his way down to Florida because I was curious if like that was part of it, but he didn't force his way down. They worked within parameters. He did have an 8-team no trade. But if it wasn't Florida and he didn't want to go across the country, where else could he have gone? Carolina, maybe. Washington, maybe. Washington kind of stood relatively pat. They get Anthony Beauvillier, but like that's not like they're not doing that to like completely, elevate themselves. It's like, we just need a supporting cast member.
That's a Casey Middlestad edition.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like revolutionary in terms of the what it does to the foundations of your team. But I think that I do wonder though if Marchand played with Bennett at the Four Nations, saw Reinhart at the Four Nations and said, okay, like I could be like a souped up middle sixer on this team. Like, hell yeah, sign me up. I mean, it's very interesting how this all transpired. And, what I'm curious about though is, does this last beyond this year? And if so, what does that do for Marchand's legacy? Like we're months away from that. I understand that. But like, if he goes there and stays there, you got to feel a little bit different, right? Like in a weird way.
Oh yeah, if he stays with their chief rival the last couple of years, I'm not even sure you'd call it a rivalry. Like Florida's had the clear upper hand. Their nemesis is how I would describe them.
Matt, if you told me in 2022 that the Florida Panthers would be the franchise that like fundamentally breaks the Boston Bruins, I would be like, you're out of your mind. No way. Florida wrecks their dream season, then concusses their captain, and then the Bruins make these massive commitments to free agents with the sole idea of bridging the gap between themselves and the Panthers, and then both guys don't look very good in the and I'm like, oh my God, how does this keep happening? Like I would have never thought the Florida Panthers would be the greater thorn in the Bruins side than, say, the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Toronto Maple Leafs or the Montreal Canadiens. Like it's kind of crazy how we got here in like 2 years' time.
Yeah, it's been the best roster building in the league. I think you can't really argue that with the way the Panthers have built their team.
Bill Zito's fantastic. He's people might not know this. Bill Zito was the agent for both Tim Thomas and Tuukka Rask before he became a front office executive. Really good guy, straight shooter, and he's really like one thing I respect about him as a front office guy is that he identifies his player types and he's just all in. And he knows and he trusts his support staff that they are going to take a flawed asset and they are going to turn him into gold. You know, the way that Florida has become a factory for repairing defensemen that the rest of the league says, oh, that guy sucks now. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if they can fix Seth Jones because they fixed other guys. Like, that's a sign of a great organization and a great, you know, again, using the term foundation that they've built there in Florida, and Zito has a huge hand in it. I think he is the best GM in the league. I put him up there with Jim Nill in Dallas. I think those guys are 1 and 2 in the NHL. Easy to say, I know, but just their way of identifying talent and building out a cast, I think fantastic team building, to your point.
Yeah, and like they've acquired guys in a similar fashion that the Bruins have, where like it's a former first-round pick. He hasn't quite panned out yet. You know, he hasn't quite turned into what we think he could turn into. And then he breaks out when he gets to Florida. Like Sam Reinhart is a perfect example of that. Like, not that he was, you know, a total nothing before he got to Florida. He was scoring a little bit, but like now he's a 50-goal scorer there. Like that, they've made a lot of shrewd moves like that. And obviously the Tkachuk trade. And, you know, the Alexander Barkov pick from whatever year that was has obviously paid off long term. They got him for the next few years. And, yeah, if Marchand stays there, I mean, like if he wanted a 2-3 year deal, he shows up, he's healthy, and he plays well for the Panthers. Like, I could see him getting a multi-year deal somewhere. You think realistically most 37-year-old forwards go year to year when they hit free agency? But Brad Marchand can still score. I mean, he's still an effective player, and like if he shows off that playoff pedigree and he helps the Panthers win another cup, 2 cups in a row, like he's gonna make himself a lot of money. And like we've talked about the possibility of Marchand maybe signing back here, which is pretty rare across all sports where a guy's traded away and then signs right back. Like I'm not holding my breath for that. But yeah, like. Brad Marchand has a good opportunity in front of him as long as he can get back healthy.
And another addition that the Panthers made that flies under the radar is they picked up Carter Verhaeghe when he was like a bit player for the Lightning, and they turned him into like a 30-goal scorer, you know, top 6 fixture on their team.
Evan Rodriguez, and he scores key goals for them on a cup run. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah. No, they've done a really good job there. And yeah, with Marchand, like I'm curious what happens. Like clearly think he wants term on his next contract, or it would have been an easy one for the Bruins to hammer out because they have the cap space. You know, like if they're far apart on money, it's because it's money and term, not just term. Like because they have the money to make it work in the short term. I think their aspirations are pretty big, though.
Yeah, no, I think it's the term mainly that was the holdup there. Okay, well, Ty, we're sort of running out of time here. We're obviously, we said before that we're going to get into more detail on these trades. The next episode, when we have more time to sort of break it down, I do want to.
Well, we can run through the big ones. We'll do the whole deadline next episode, but we'll run through the big ones that happen on Friday. We're good.
Right now, you want to do that?
Yeah, let's do it. Real quick hitters here.
All right, cool. All right, so my favorite trade they made was Brandon Carlo to the Maple Leafs for a first-round pick, fourth-round pick, and Fraser Minten. Minten, you know, physical guy. That's what I've seen. That's what I've heard. That's what I've read. That's the word on him. So I feel like he's going to step in and, you know, be sort of a fan favorite or have potential for that. But I don't know what he is long term. But the fact that they got a first-round pick and a fourth-round pick for Brandon Carlo, I think that's a great deal for them. And it's a good pickup for the Maple Leafs. Like, they needed guys that could just play actual defense. Like, we've been saying that for years. It's funny. I saw a guy on Twitter. It's like, I can't wait to see Carlo light someone up. It's gonna hit like crack, he said. And I was like, you're setting yourself up for disappointment there, buddy. But Carlo, you know, smart, in his own zone, responsible, and he'll sort of tighten things up in the defensive end for the Maple Leafs. So I think that's a good pickup for them. It'll be interesting to see if he helps them go on a deeper run than they've been going on. But for the Bruins, I think great return to get a first-round pick for him.
Yeah, it comes back to the overall point of what do you believe is more valuable to the Bruins in their current state? A $4.1 million defenseman who is a PK stalwart. It's a good contract and he's a good player, but for where you are right now, the first round pick in Fraser Minton is probably more valuable at the end of the day, like that, because you are restarting your clock, so to speak, and so, the life of the Carlo contract, it's a good contract, but are you going to be at the top of your own game as a team over the life of that contract, or are you going to have to pay him more money by the time you're back to being a true cup contender? And if so, well, then what's the point of keeping him around? So I like the value on that, especially, Fraser Minton was like a high second round pick. So it teeters on being a first round pick. I know that's a weird way of looking at it, but he was a top 40 prospect, basically. Okay, that's good. Bring those guys in. And so I like it from that standpoint. Minton, physicality, talking with some Leafs people yesterday, just kind of trying to get a feel for him because he only played 15 games, so I haven't seen a ton of him. They say the work ethic is off the charts. He's a hard worker, and I think that's interesting because you're losing some of that with Marchand and Coyle, two guys that were gym freaks, were in there all the time. We're always, going the extra mile to set the standard. And so if you can bring a young guy in who everyone's like, dude, this kid's always in the gym. This is great. That can go a long way.
I believe Coyle was who Sweeney compared Minton to when he talked yesterday.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair
Coyle qualities. So it's a good piece.
No, it's a good piece, and the 2026 draft is considered a pretty solid one in terms of the first round talent and how deep it is. So the Bruins should be able to get a good player at some point there. This is the name of the game now, right? It's pretty clear Sweeney's not going anywhere. So now he's got to maximize this opportunity in front of the team. And that's going to be the actual challenging part. I don't want to minimize the work he's done here. Right. Because I think it does take some stones to trade some of these guys, but that's the easy part of selling. You got to maximize it, though. You got to nail the picks. You got to nail the prospects. You got to make sure you hit the home run there. And so that's now the next challenge for the team. But the Carlo trade, I like it. I do like it. I like Brandon Carlo. I always thought he'd be more of a hockey trade kind of guy than for futures, so to speak. But
right.
Okay, they're acknowledging they're in a different spot than I thought they were on Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon, I saw this as a quick, on-the-fly retool. They're a little bit deeper. They're a little bit closer to rebuilding time. So to trade him for two valuable futures, I think that's fair value there.
Absolutely. All right, so they also traded Charlie Coyle to the Avs for Casey Middlestat, who we talked about. Will Zellers, another recent...
Love the inclusion of him. He's a third-round pick. He was a top 5 prospect in the Avalanche pipeline. Now the Avalanche are similar to the Bruins and Lightning and these teams where they've traded tons of picks. So maybe the overall depth of their pipeline is not as strong as some of these other teams. But a top 5 pick, he can score the puck like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, he's got second in the USHL in scoring. There's something there.
Yeah, he's got some stuff he's got to work on. And I
mean, he's 18, so
yeah, we're gonna find out more about that. I'm gonna talk to some people who have seen him in the coming days and get more of a picture about him because I haven't seen the Green Bay Gamblers as much as one may think. But a very high ceiling player. He's actually gonna be playing at North Dakota next year. He was originally a Boston University commit. He decommitted and is going to Nodak, which I'm not crazy about, to be honest with you.
Why?
I think Hockey East is the best competition in college hockey. Yeah. And so I want my guys in Hockey East. Nothing against that conference, but I just feel like that's a better barometer, so to speak, for quality competition. And I also think as a smaller scorer, that's where I kind of want you to be, if that makes sense. And I also the North
definitely wanted him in the backyard, not having a
yeah. I'm curious.
Argo.
I'm curious if that can change between now and whenever. But no. And also the other thing with North Dakota that I get nervous about is like, it's been a while since they've had like a forward that I'm like, oh, that guy's legit. Like, they've had Brock Besser, they've had Shane Pinto for like quick little stops. The kid that you saw,
their pipeline isn't really what it used to be.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a little bit of like whatever about it, but the kid we saw on Thursday night in Carolina, Jackson Blake, he played at North Dakota, so like maybe it's a little bit better. But ultimately, I kind of want him in the backyard. I'm curious if they can make that happen. But that's an exciting pick. That's an exciting player to bring in. And again, it comes back to what we talked about, right? Like, what's more valuable to the Bruins, 33-year-old Charlie Coyle or the prospect, and whatever? Like, it's probably the latter. Again, it's just acknowledgement of where you are versus where you're going. I think that's important here.
Yeah, I think the fact that they traded the amount of pieces they did signifies that Sweeney knows where they're at and knows what he needed to do. And so it was good on him to be aggressive. We can quibble about the returns on the individual trades, but I think big picture-wise, like, he did the right thing. So what else we got here? All right, so they traded Justin Brazeau earlier in the week to the Minnesota Wild for Marat Husnudinov, another recent. This guy's a second-round pick, I believe, in the 30s, and Jacob Lauko's back. So we got him. This is like the Lauko reacquisition. Like, that sort of says to me, like, you got to ice a team. You got to have a roster. You can't just trade away all your players. And so, like, people say, well, why didn't they trade Zacha? Why didn't they trade this? It's like, well, you got to have someone to put in your lineup on a nightly basis. So I think Lauko is part of that, like why they got him back. They're going to need some energy on that third and fourth line. I think he's sort of along the same lines as Mitten. Like, he's going to come in and he's going to bring the energy and that edge in games that ultimately don't really matter in the standings for him. But like, he's going to show the kind of work ethic and competitiveness that you really want to see. And so I'm happy they got Lauko back. I like Lauko.
Good locker room addition. Something to consider here as well is that, like, he's close friends with a lot of guys still on the team, some of whom are not having great years. And so maybe having their friend back, I know it sounds silly, like, in the grand scheme of things, but like, anyone who's played sports understands, like, sometimes you have chemistry with guys, right? And seeing them makes you feel better. And you're just happy to be around them and play with them. And so if he can do that for a couple of guys on the team and they play better, like, all right, it's whatever. It's found money, you know. And the other thing with Lauko too, good speed on a team that's slow, and he draws penalties. Like, so I like bringing him back for more than just like a fourth line, whatever. Like, you're instilling competition. You're instilling the idea of, like, there are so many games the last 2 years where, like, the Bruins would be flat or they just wouldn't have it. You send out Lauko, he has a big hit, he has a fight, he draws a penalty, he's a little now the tenor of the game is changing. Like, you're gonna have some sleepy nights here when you're not competing for a playoff spot. You need heartbeats, right? You have Kastelik, now you have Lauko, like, you got some energy, and I think that the Bruins hope that permeates throughout their lineup right now, because it's easy to disengage when you're not competing. And for some of these guys, it's their first time not competing in a long ass time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Husnudinov, I mean, he might be a third line center long term, but it was interesting. You pointed this out, I think, when in your articles for 985thesportshub.com, how he played a lot of defensive zone time for Minnesota in the playing time that he's gotten at the NHL level. So, like, he's already being depended on, at least in Minnesota he was, as, a defensive guy, a guy that can be responsible in his own end. And so that's a thing that often, like, you have a guy that needs to sort of learn that as he goes, as he develops in his career. But Husnudinov already has that, so I look at him as sort of a high floor guy. Like, I think we'll like him. Like, he's not a long-term answer for, like, a top six, franchise center or whatever. But I think he could settle in as a legitimate, like, third line center, middle six guy. Like, I like that pickup.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited to see him play. That is a player that Really intriguing to me because, you go back and you look at his numbers. He had like 40 points in 65 games or whatever it was in the KHL for SKA St. Petersburg. And that's interesting to me because he was a 20-year-old in that league. So he's a top 5 or 6 scorer on that team as a 20-year-old playing against other pros. Now, it's not the NHL. I understand that. It is probably the second best pro league in the world, though. And so to have those kind of results and that offensive flair, they got to coax that out of him a little bit more. But opportunity is the biggest thing. And we just talked about Jacob Lauko. The fourth line is pretty set. That's one. I would say the top line and the fourth line are pretty set here in Boston. So what does that mean? That means that he's going to get an opportunity in the middle six, which is where he should be long-term for his career. And so that's a good spot for him to be in. And so now it's about maximizing that, seeing what he can do, what he can't do, and allowing him to grow. That is secondarily going to be the big challenge here for Joe Sacco, Chris Kelly, Jay Leach. Like, they're going to have to bring players along, and they're going to have to coach knowing that their job is to bring players along. This is not, we got to win, so you got to be completely buttoned and polished. Like no, you're going to have to deal with some mistakes, and you're going to have to help them grow. They can't have a mistake and then you bench them because you want to win that night. Like, no, you're not expected to win that night. You're expected to help these players grow and come along. So how do you do that? Can you coach them like that? Where does it go from there? So that's a secondary challenge here for the Boston Bruins down the stretch over the final 19 games or whatever it is for this team.
Yeah, Neely, Sweeney, not used to that whole thing where, like, no, we need to be buttoned up. Like,
they haven't done it forever.
They have to develop. They have to see what they got. They got to try different things. They got to be okay with mistakes, all that stuff. And obviously the coaches are sort of an extension of that. So it's going to be interesting to see how those guys adjust to all that. Quickly, they made one more trade that we need to get to before we get out of here today, Ty. They traded Mark McLaughlin for defenseman Daniil Misiul. He's only played one game in the NHL so far. He made his NHL debut earlier this season. He's from Belarus. 6'3", 176. Somebody's got to start feeding him some sandwiches, Misiul. But from what I've read, he's another physical guy. So, like, he's a physical defensive guy. I mean, they could use some of that. You know, they lost McAvoy, so I think they could use some of that in their lineup, and that's along the same lines where it's like you got to put someone in the lineup. But yeah, we'll see if he makes it to the NHL this year. But I'm all for bringing in more physical defensemen. Yeah,
it's the flags were flying at half-mast today at Augusta's Chicken in Billerica at the departure of Mark McLaughlin, a really good kid, a hardworking kid. It's funny, he's actually going to a franchise that is GM'd by a Billerica native, Tom Fitzgerald. So it's a Billerica reunion over in Newark, New Jersey for the Devils right now.
Party at the Dollar Tree.
Yeah, so Misiul is so it's funny. You mentioned the height and the weight. I saw that and I went, geez, the kid's a friggin' beanpole. And then somebody reached out to me and said, actually, no, watch him. He's nasty. He's got he's got some mean streak to him. So I'm excited to see it. I think we're going to see it in Providence more than the NHL. But just another flyer that you're taking on a younger player at a position of long-term need for the franchise. You look at their right side right now. Or both sides, really. It's not a lot of certainty. Not a lot of certainty beyond the NHL level. And so it's a flyer. You take a chance, why not? Another trade we didn't get to, though, Matt, real quick. Henry Yukiharu is coming over from the Buffalo Sabres in exchange for a 4th-round pick. Yukiharu is interesting player. A right shot D, final year of his current contract, played in Chicago, was a 1st-round pick of Chicago back in 2017, had a career high in Buffalo a year ago, had a plus 14, which was actually best among all Sabres a year ago. This is a guy who, if you watch him in Chicago, you saw him in Buffalo, he's actually pretty solid. When he's been on his game, he can carry the puck out of his own zone and make some plays happen. A defenseman on the right side that you want the puck on his stick. And I find that telling because you sort of look at the right side of the Bruins and You had Carlo. You don't want him transporting. You had Peak. You don't want him transporting. And so now with McAvoy out, like this is another option to carry the puck out of the defensive zone for the Bruins and make some plays happen. When he's on his game, really good at clean exits out of the zone and pushing pace the other way. So an option there for the Bruins. I wonder how he factors into their long-term plans, if at all. You said it. I completely agree. You got to ice team in the now. But right side, their commitments, they don't really have a lot beyond this season. So this could be like a 19-game tryout for a guy like Yoki Haru, who is coming from Buffalo. And the Bruins and the Sabres, they like the same kind of player type. So I wonder if there's a long-term fit here for Yoki Haru and the Bruins.
Yeah, it's a good point. There's opportunity ahead for the guys they've brought in. It's not just they're not just pieces for a future trade or just going to be buried in Providence forever. I mean, maybe they will, knowing how the Bruins have handled prospects. But there's opportunities for guys to carve out roles and like long term, be a long term piece. So like I said, it's a lot of throws at the dartboard. But I think there's upside with some of these players they brought in, especially Will Zellers, who's a Dinov. So I do like what they did overall. I mean, we could quibble about the quality of the individual trades. The Marchand trade, I wish you got more there. But overall, I thought that, Don Sweeney did the right thing. He traded off pieces that weren't going to be part of their long-term plans, and he got something for him. And the fact they came out of it with a first, a second that could become a first, 2 more seconds, a fourth, like they got a lot of draft capital. And like you said, we'll talk about it in future pods, but the next step is to actually start drafting better. I feel like they've been going in that a positive direction the last few years. So, I'm a little more confident now in their drafting than I was, several years ago. But going to be a big test for them with all these picks they brought in, and now they have to rebuild the roster. It's going to be a crucial couple drafts coming up for them. So, Ty, do you have any closing thoughts before we get out of here?
No, we're going to get into it more when we record in person. Which is looking like either Monday or Tuesday on my end. Anyways, I don't know if I don't want to make your schedule for you, but that's how it's looking at. And I think what's going to be good about that, Matt, is that we're going to actually have some games to look at with some of these players here and how they fit in.
Yep, it's going to be it's a different kind of interesting. The Bruins have been interesting, in terms of being a playoff team for many years, but now they're interesting for a different reason. So, all right, Ty, I appreciate you coming on and going over the trades. I know we got a game coming up here on Saturday afternoon, so we're kind of scrambling. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to us. All right, that does it for this episode. If you made it this far, thanks. I love you. I apologize for the technical difficulties earlier. It's going to be some fancy editing in there. Hopefully I can clean that up a little bit. And, thanks for listening, folks. We're going to get back in the studio sometime next week, and we'll get into even more detail about the Bruins trade deadline, the future of the team, the future of this season. The guys they got, and the drafting, and Sweeney and the coaches. There's still a lot to get to, and there's league stuff that we can get to as well. So looking forward to that. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll talk to you again soon.